Thank you very much, firstly, to Evan Yu for Vue.js. Also, Sainsbury's to providing the venue tonight, and one of the speakers, and all of the organisation. And again, our main sponsor, Nakama, for providing the food and drink and logistical support. So first up is Blake Newman, who works here at Sainsbury's, and he's going to give us a little show around of Vue.js.
There it is. Right. So Vue.js, it's simple and great, really. Everything I found about Vue.js, it makes you keep things simple. So as you get to use it, you'll find that it does more for you without making anything more complex. So an introduction about me. I'm a web developer, currently working for Sainsbury's. I'm now on the Vue core team. There's about 20 people now, so he's expanding, making sure that it's sustainable as a solution. And my Twitter, if anyone wants to follow me, is Blake Newman. Right. Is it another MVC framework? No, not quite. It's component-driven rather than being model, view, and controller. You have the view, which is its main focus, and then your components are meant to encapsulate your DOM to help you encapsulate the view rather than you encapsulate everything, and then you can extend it to have models by Vuex, which is Flux, and then you can do stuff further. Similar to React, it's just a view layer, so it's extendable. Delivers the view through components with Reactivity. It's progressive enhancement library. That's what we like to label it as, mainly because it adds upon itself. Rather than it becoming all flush out the box, it only covers the view, and then you progressively use it for its nature. And it's completely extendable via plugins. Right, so now I'm going to go into a bit more detail about how it works. Not too in-depth at the moment, but it uses reactive data binding system to create the data-driven view, and the DOM is always in sync with the data. So this is a little diagram. So basically you have your view model, you have your DOM listeners, your data bindings, and then they communicate between the model and the view. So it's kind of an MVVM, but more focused on the view. It gives you a lot more for the view. Its component system creates abstraction, so you can isolate all of your code chunks, make them reusable. It uses the component's web spec. It implements the slot API, and the special attribute is, I'll go into more detail about this later. And it's a great foundation for building large-scale apps. When you first start using it, you can start envisioning it growing. It's not something that you have to go and learn everything about. You can learn it stage by stage and integrate new features as you realize them, rather than having to learn everything at once. It's a simple and intuitive way to combine the concerns. This is a view file. The view file itself acts as a manifest for your components. You say where the styles for that component stay, the template, and the script. The reason you use view files is because it gives you hot reloading out of the box. And I'm going to cover a lot more on this later, and it's a really powerful tool to help your development. It speeds up your development massively. Now, reactivity. This is the part that gets a bit more complex. And for you to understand how Vue works, you should really take a little bit more detail on how the reactivity system works. So you don't come into all of these little gotchas like, oh, I didn't set this property, so it's not reactive. So your models are just plain JavaScript objects, which makes it really easy to understand and test. And it makes state management very simple and intuitive. Right, we're going into a bit more detail of how it works now. So it uses object.defineProperty, which is standard ES5 functionality. It creates getters and setters for you, and a bit more other config, which you can hook into, and Vue wraps that round. And it creates the dependency tracking and change notification during access and modification. So as you go and update a property, it will only care about what its dependencies are tracked by. So you go update message, it will only update anything that's to do with message. If you've got another property that's reactive bound to that message, it will then go and update that and return you what needs to be there, rather than everything in a watch cycle like Angular does, which uses dirty checking. Right, so this is a bit more of an example of how it all works. So you've got B, is the purple one. So you go and get it, and then, or first you set it. So you want to update it, so you set message, dot message within the view, and then it comes back to the watcher, and then it will go and collect its dependencies. So whatever is to do with it, or whatever's been updated to do with B, will then go in turn and reevaluate itself, and then it brings it back to the view or directive. So you can see that the DOM a.b, if you use that and you go and update B somewhere within your application, it's the only thing it cares about. So if you go and update C, say that's the purple one at the bottom, it doesn't need to worry about B, so it gets completely ignored, which makes it fast and reliable. There are some caveats. So there's a limitation of ES5 and define property. It's not able to detect additions and deletions. So what you need to do is, you've got your data object on your component, so you want to be able to set all of your data up first, which makes it very easy to go to your component and see what should be there, and then everything will be reactive and thereon. So if you have an array, you should then use set as well. So if your property doesn't exist yet, or .push is wrapped, there's a few functions that are wrapped by reactivity. So you get all the benefits, but there are some gotchas, and you can find them at the website just to make sure that if you're not seeing something update, it's most likely something to do with the reactivity model, but this is just standard ES5. DOM updates, they're asynchronous, which makes it great. So it's really performant. So if you have a queue of changes and you go and flush them all out at once, then it will create a buffer, and all of those changes, so you've changed 10 items, it will go and add that to the array. And then that buffer will wait until the DOM is next available to update, so it will be try and update at 60 frames per second, and when it is, it will go and flush all of those changes at once rather than it keep on updating the DOM, which can be very expensive. And if you really want to wait till the DOM has been updated before setting anything, or you need to get something from the DOM, the best way to do that is use the next tick to wait until the DOM data has changed. Right, so computed properties. Now these are really special in Vue. They give you so much more flexibility, and they help you keep, so you can do custom data. So you go and join data, you go and filter data, and it will go and return you those computed properties. So the difference between a computed property and a normal data object is a data object only has one dependency on itself, and the chain goes up and flows up. Whereas a computed property, any dependencies, it will keep its own reactive dependencies, so it knows what everything is. So it will then, if something inside that computed property, so you say you do this dot message and this dot update as the two values, if you change one of those, it will go and re-evaluate both of them. And then if it's none of those are changed, each time the next DOM update happens, it will go and use the cached value, and it only will go and change from the cache value once one of your dependencies is updated. So now I'm going to go into a bit more of the feature side of Vue. That was a bit in depth, but this will cover all of the cool, nice features that Vue allows you to do. So these are the main features. So you've got data binding syntax, modifiers, components, dynamic components, asynchronous components, the component lifecycle, and then you've got directives, methods and event handling, filters, mixins, some transitions, which is a really cool tool, hot reloading, which really helps your development workflow, and plugins. And then global and local registrations. You can choose where to register it, so you can get the most performance with Webpack splitting of your code. So data binding. So it's one-way binding by default. Unlike Angular, which is by default by two-way binding, it makes it very simple to keep track of what's happening. So everything has a uniflow. So you go and update something in your app, it will go in one direction. You can use the .sync modifier, but I would avoid it at all costs because two-way data binding is very dirty. So you've got simple interpolation, fee bind and fee on. Fee bind is to dynamically bind your data. So each time it updates, it will go and update that attribute, or Theon to call an event on, say, a click event. And then style properties are auto prefixing. So if you have any custom styles that are applied on the DOM, they're going to be auto prefixed for you. So easy identification within the templates. So as you can see, you've got the message, and then styled message means it's only one time. So if you want to update it once, you'll go and apply that, and it will lose track of its dependencies, and it will just stay there once. And then you've got the shorthand for bind, which is just a colon, which is easily identifiable by all. And then you've got the @ symbol, which is for Theon, which means @click, and this is similar to how Angular 2 does. And then all of your directives are prefixed by Vue, so you can see what Vue's using. So you know it's a Vue directive, not an Angular directive, if you go and use it with Angular. And then filters, like Angular, is denoted by the pipe symbol. Right, so we're going to look into components now. So high level, they're custom elements, so they try and mimic the web spec DOM. Internal lifecycle, they've got an isolated scope, which means they don't interfere with any other data that a parent component or a sibling component. So every data is applied just to that component, and it encapsulates reusable code. So the component's lifecycle, you can ignore this diagram because you probably can't see it at all. You've got data observation, which happens first, and then you've got your init. So that's where all of your first initial bindings, working out where your dependencies come from, will happen. You've got created, which is once it's been called and it's ready to be used within your app. Before compile, which means before the template's been compiled. So you can hook into that and modify the template. Say you want to apply directives to that template, you can go and read that string and then dynamically apply them. So if you get some HTML template back from the server, you can then go and apply that and use it as you will. And then you've got before compiled, which is after it's been compiled, so you can go and manipulate it once more again. And then you've got ready. So that ready is when it's been attached to the DOM and you want to start interacting with it, so you can put custom event listeners, etc. And then once you want the component to be completely done with, before destroy, you can then remove those event listeners and any other custom logic. And then you've got destroyed, which is once it's all completely been destroyed, so you can do some custom logic, maybe initialize another component. So this is component put together. It's a bit small, so hopefully you can read it. So you can see you've got the inline template. It can be an external template with a Vue file, but this is just inline for readability. You have your data, so this is where you should initialize all of your data, so you can go to your component and actually read what the properties and reactive properties are going to be used. So it's very simple to understand what to expect in the DOM. Computed properties, so I'll go a bit more into depth on what they look like later on. Methods, again, I'll do the same in events and ready. So ready, you can execute your logic within there. So it's kind of like reacts on render function, but after the DOM's been made. Right, so in the DOM, you simply reference it like demo component, and then you can see I registered it as a demo component, and then you can use it wherever you like within your DOM. Then there's this really good dynamic components. So it's using the web spec components tag API and the is attribute. So basically what happens, instead of, with Angular, you typically would have done this register an if here, an if here, and if here. And depending on the value, let's go and show them. So instead, your logic can retain inside of your actual component logic, and then you can set a property current view, and then each time that updates, it will go and re-render another component. So you can do self-routing within a small app without having to bring in Vue router, for example. And this is really great to make sure that your logic in your templates is as simple as possible. And then you've got keep alive, which extends it further, which means that when the component's swapped out, it won't re-render it. It will just keep it alive in memory and then bring it back to you when you want to reuse it. And then the activate hook, if you've got any data that's asynchronous, then you can use this to wait for the component timing. So your timing of your component, you go to the server, you want to request something back, instead of rendering it straight away with nothing in there, you can wait and then resolve it when you need it. So asynchronous components. And now with Webpack and Browserify, you can divide your app into smaller chunks out of the box. So this will, your main app will have, it will work out what, so if you've got a dependency component that's 3 levels down, if it's used in multiple places, it will be put up to the app because it's been used in multiple places. Webpack is very clever to know exactly where it needs to be used, and the same for Browserify. So you've got a few component, and if you notice, you've got the array notation for when you do require, and this is how Webpack knows that it needs to be a separate bundle, so it will go and unbundle it and take it out for you, which makes you splitting out all of your code. So you could have your router file, and you've got 10 components, and you could split them all out, so they're all separate scripts, and when you go to the browser, only that necessary code is loaded on that page. So that was components, the high level of components. All of the documentation and more depth can be found on the site. And now directives, I'm going to go into a bit of detail to them because there's a clear distinction between components, is that with Angular, directives, you use them everywhere. Everything's registered to a directive and there's no clear purpose, where directives are meant to encapsulate the DOM manipulation only. They're meant for if you want to go and manipulate a specific title tag or something like that inside of a component. So you can then append it, or you can do stuff like fee shows, so you can go and move it, hide it, etc. And then components stand for a self-contained unit that has its own view and data logic. So these are the internal directives of Vue. So we're maybe planning to bring them out in a later version, so they're not in the core bundle. But the main ones at the moment are text, HTML, if, show, else, for, and you can read on. So text and HTML, therefore inputting your data. And then you've got if to hide and show it with just not evaluating further on. So if you put a fee if there, the code below it won't get evaluated. So you have directives and components below it, it won't go and read that. And then you've got show and else, which just displays it and hides it. For is just a list of components or a list of DOM elements, and each time you pass it an array and you can repeat over it. On, so that's when you want to dispatch an event to your component. Bind, bring data to your template. Fee model, so this way is the two-way data binding for forms. So you have an input field, it would do the two-way data binding for you, but it doesn't do it with traditional two-way data binding. It will call a DOM update to go and send it back to the DOM. So it feeds back the data, so it just encapsulates on and bind. And then fee ref, so you can reference that component from another component. So that child component, if you use fee ref there and give it a value, then a parent component, you can then just directly listen to it and look at it. VL, which is registering the element, and then pre, so you can pre-render stuff, and then vcloak, so if waiting for stuff to be rendered before it actually gets shown. So your custom directive. So it will look something similar to like this. You have your bind. It's where your preparation work happens. Adding event listeners or expensive stuff should be done here. Updates, so if your directive updates, it'll go recall itself with the update method and the new value and old value. And then unbind is where you do all of the cleanup. And then you can have other properties here like extra functions that you can use. So you can do this method. So modifiers. Now this is a really cool feature of directives, is that you can have .prevent or many other things, and you can have custom modifiers as well. So it makes it very easy to make your directive reusable in different ways. So instead of passing loads of values to the directive, you just modify the directive itself. So you've got methods and event handling. Right. As seen with Eon, you can bind the events into your templates, invoking the JavaScript logic. And does it violate the separation concerns? It does in the traditional sense, but it's so easy to see where Vue is used in a DOM that you can understand when and why it's being used rather than it getting all tangled up. So it makes it easy to locate the handler functions within the Vue. So you've got your @ symbol, you can see it directly in there. No manual attachment for the event listeners. JS can be pure logic and, importantly, DOM-free. And all event listeners are automatically removed upon destroying, and it's completely easily testable because everything's an object. Rather than you having to talk to the DOM within your logic, your logic itself just contains data. You can have reference to HTML, but by default you've just got plain objects to test. So a Vue file will look something like this. You have your template tag, a script tag, and a style tag. You can have multiple style tags if you've got multiple sources. You can have inline styles, but if you want to reference anything, you can do the style source and source attribute, and that will point to the CSS file. And then the same for script tags. You can do the same there, and templates. You can actually just use the manifest for a Vue file. It doesn't have to contain anything. It can just be telling you what the component structure is. And then you'd have your click handler like that, and then your methods click handler. So that's kind of what it would look like. It would be a bit more full, because the more logic you put in there, the more data it have. So mixins. Now this is a really cool way to make reusable features without having to have your components inside themselves. So you don't have components and components and components. You can just have a mixin to pass that logic and those functions and that data across to them, and they'll go and be merged upon each other. So you have two ready methods. They both get called. So your mixin will get called first, and then the one after. So it doesn't just have to be objects that get merged. It will automatically merge all of your functions and methods. And it can contain any component options. So you've got ready, you've got onCompile, you've got your data object, you've got your computed methods. Everything will get merged for you, and it will call in order based on how you've defined it. So a Mixin simple demo. So you've got your computed properties, methods, events, ready. So if then you had your component here, and you put your mixins and required that mixin, and you have your template and data, you'd expect them to be both combined. So it should look something along that lines. So that's what it would actually be. You don't see that code. It doesn't go and output it. That's what your expected code should be. So your data object, if you had two data objects, one in there, you'd call that data object first, that data, and combine them. And then that's it for your mixins. So workflow. This is where Vue really comes into itself. So you have VueJS development equals Win. You've got Vue CLI, which is a great tool for bootstrapping your app up. And then you can use boilerplate templates with Vue CLI to help your development workflow. Bring in Webpack, so you can have a simple setup, a more advanced setup where you can configure it to your liking. And then it works great with Webpack and Browserify. And it enables hot reloading of your components and HTML, CSS, and JS internally. So everything, you go and update your CSS, it should update without refreshing the page. So change detections to your code will propagate up to your components when you're using hot reloading. Components are reloaded, keeping any state. Vue files are essential for this. If you don't have the Vue files, it won't be able to hook into the API automatically, and you'd have to manually go and provide your own hooks for the hot reload API, and it gets a little tricky to understand. And they act as the dependency tree, so everything will propagate up based on where it's been required, where it's been imported, so you know that your component is the essential part for it to update and refresh that section. So if you have a parent component and a child component, you update something in that child component, it won't go and update the parent, it just updates that internal child component. And now I'm going to show you, hopefully, some live features of Vue.js and how it will develop, and I should be able to show you the code base a bit more on how I've structured it, etc. So this is on my personal site that I'm developing at the moment. So, in slideshow, so you should be able to see everything. So this is nicked from the Vue.js demo, so it's just basically a simple polygon tool. So you can add a stat, and it's added it. I've got loads of errors in here, so I'm going to actually update it. And you can see that the state itself, when the component updates, it won't go and delete the data. It keeps itself. So if you're debugging a form or something, it becomes really essential to be able to do it quickly to debug it rather than having to go and reload that page, re-input the data. It will stay there and remain there. So I've kind of structured it. I don't know if you can see it that well because the menu's slightly small. If it will allow me to close it, there you go. So I normally separate it out based on the type of thing it is. So I've got my services, that'd be my APIs. You've got store, styles, your mixins, filters and directives and components completely separated. I'm going to go look at the access label. So I've added this. If you look at the titles, they're a bit messy because I added rubbish there. So what I do is if I delete that, you can see on the terminal that when I save it, Webpack will detect a change and the component, well, that didn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work because you've had it offline for so long. So if I reset it up, it should start working now. So if I then undo that change, save it. There you go. So you notice the page itself didn't reload. So if I was on the portfolio page and I was editing that, fixing that bug, when I go back to the example, the state remains the same. So when you're inside a flow of your application, say you're on the login page and then you go through and it's got a direct flow. And if you ever come out from the app, you get returned to the login page. If you're trying to debug that, you've got an error, you normally have to refresh the page, which becomes a nuisance because you have to go through the whole flow again, log in, go through the flow to the last page and you're stuck there. So you can go to that last page and remain on that page without it reloading anything. So this works for the template and more importantly the script as well. So normally with JavaScript, if you go and edit it, you have to have everything reloaded. But this does this very cleverly, that only it will keep the state for you. So anything on that component, it will then go and reuse that state and apply it. So if you go and update a method so it does something differently, it will then reload just that component JavaScript and then that state will get back injected and then you can continue on developing and then use that method. So you've got a submit button, add that method, click it, there you go. So if I show you that, so if I then change that to 5, if I go back to the example, then go here, change that to 10. I don't even know what's that meant to do. Let me go to another one. Okay, so yeah, I've got a great example for you. Right, so the main example, when I remove a stat, so I can add a stat, add another one. Oh, maybe I can't. Right, so if I then reduce that and then I'll go, okay, I want to delete it. I delete that one. And if I look at the console, I've got an error. I nicked this from the VueJS demo site, so it's not my code. I just repurposed it. So, blame everyone you. So let's try that again. If I delete, I should have got a console.log when I get to the last one. Yep, can't delete that. And you notice the state remains the same, so you should have 3 items when I go and change this message. So I delete this. So whatever that value will be. And then it doesn't always work, which is really annoying. Let's try again. Right. It's normally when there's a JavaScript error. So if you have a, there you go. Nope. I don't know why it's not working. It does work most of the time, though. But mainly for templates, it's really usable for templates. So you go and modify a value on your template. So you've got a string or your tag and you want to go and change it quickly, it'll go and refresh it. But it's really a great tool. So I can go and change the styles as well, and that will auto hot reload for me as well. So let's change the color to... I really hate typing when you can't see a screen. No. There you go. So, if you notice, the page didn't reload at all, and the CSS itself has been applied. This is very simple to do with CSS, but it's a great development tool. So, the key points to that is that if you really want a fast workflow, is to use Vue's files as much as possible, because they bring so many features out of the box that most other frameworks, it's a lot of work to give you. So let's move on. So this is a bonus. I've got some Vue stickers. I'll probably give away about 10 of them. So if anyone can give me the correct answer for this, I'll give them out to the first person that can answer. So what is the value of this computed property after 1 minute of being rendered? So is it the same or is it different? Because date.now, you expect that to be constantly updated because Vue's meant to be reactive. But it's not, because Vue.date isn't reactive. So what do you actually expect from it? Can anyone give me an answer?
That's the time, that's at the time. The time now is what
Yeah.
That's loaded.
Yeah, so it would be the exact same as it's first initially rendered. And this is because all your computed properties are cached. So there's been no dependency being updated. So that current date now will stay the same. It will cache that value. But you can turn caching off. So if you put cache false, you've got computed property, it will then, each time something gets updated, each time the DOM updates, it will then just refetch and reevaluate it automatically for you, which is really easy to set up. And then if you've got nothing that's reactive, you can then use it to your advantage. So what's next for Vue? There's a lot. We're currently investigating Vue Native, Vue Server, and a lot more. We're kind of at the moment trying to get to a 1.1 release where we can update things, make it a little bit more stable for people in development. So you've got issues with the hot reloading API. We're looking into that kind of issues. There's a lot more than Vue what's been shown, a heck of a lot more, but it doesn't complicate your components. Everything's completely separated. So you have your methods, you have your computed properties, you have your data, they're in there isolated, so you can keep things organized, you're not mixing things up. What makes Vue great? Lots. I just love its reactivity system. It makes it very, very, very fast. It's got great implementation into the DOM, so a lot of people concern themselves when they mix a bit of JavaScript into the DOM. You keep all of your logic within your JavaScript. You don't mix them. You can keep all of your logic away from the DOM as much as possible, and then you just append some information for Vue to be able to render itself. So I'm going to finish off there, and then we shall get Evan onto a Skype call soon, so you'll be able to do some question and answers. But does anyone have any questions for me? Yep.
What's the main difference from the way Webpack and Browserify handle VueJS?
Did you want to give the mic so you can get recorded?
Yeah, I was asking, I've only used Browserify for VueJS, but I'm curious about what's the difference between the way you use Browserify and the way you use Webpack?
So Browserify itself is quite contained. It's not really extendable. Webpack, although the documentation is a bit slim and it's a bit hard to get yourself around, Vue has actually made it quite simple for you to get started by giving you boilerplate templates. And the main difference is that Webpack is more feature-filled, so you can go and use it to your advantage. Like you can have the hot reloading API very simply by installing a plugin. You can have different new ways, and it's all done by loaders. So you have a Vue file, and then you have a Vue loader for it, and then you have a JS loader, so you just append the type of files that are going to get loaded in, and then you can have more things like images getting pulled in. You can split out your web files much easier, and I find it, although a bit more complex to set up, it gives you a lot more tooling set to go and create. I'm not sure, I've not used Browserify much with Vue, but my opinion when I used it for a small bit, it just didn't give you enough features, like the hot reloading. I don't think it works that well with the JavaScript at all, and the HTML was a bit flaky, but when I was using it with Webpack, it was a lot more stable, although obviously my demo didn't work too well. Any other questions?
You said something about avoiding two-way binding at all costs whenever possible, but what can you do if you want to have a component that updates the parent state, like a variable in the root?
So you can call up, so when something updates, you can have a watch, which then you can talk to the parent. You should try and encapsulate your components as much as possible so that data gets passed down with props, and then you can pass it back up. So you've actually still got a single wave flow. So you're actually directing the flow back up, so you're not changing and expecting it to do it for you. But you can use the modifier .sync to do this for you. So if you've got a property that you want to, it's an attribute, and you want that to be passed back up, and then it would then be used on its parent component, that's useful. So if I can go back to the directive quickly.
Besides that, is there any other way, like a better way? Or?
No, I think we try and avoid using it as much as possible, mainly because it makes bad code. You start implementing a lot of two-way binding in the parent. What you should do is have an event and then broadcast that back up, or pass back to a parent using a watcher statement. There's many ways to get around it, but when you actually try and do two-way directive binding, you get unexpected results. You're updating the property, and then browsers interpret it differently. Some, like Firefox, reads the attributes right to left, but Chrome and Internet Explorer goes left to right. So it makes it much more difficult for you to be able to understand what attribute's going to come first, what's going to be updated. I don't know. So if you code in a way that you know that things are going to be updatable by your control, your logic, so you can pick the order of things to be updated, then it's all fine. So I try and avoid two-way data binding as much as possible. You can use Vuex, which is Flux, which is a great tool for storing your state, and then you can bring that back down. So you update that state, and then the reactive properties will bring that back down to all components that use it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Is there someone else? Someone else? And no? No? Yeah.
Two questions, I think. Oh, sorry. The first question is about CSS. I mean, what's the advantage to put my CSS there, except obvious advantage that when you develop, you can see in the real time the change, but I mean, is that...
It depends on your workflow. So we at Sainsbury's, we've been using Vue for some projects. We have a style guide, so we just bring in the whole style sheet, so we don't have styles with the component. So if you have something external where you can just bring it in, you can do that yourself and just have one import somewhere to bring in that CSS file. But one advantage is if you have a component that's self-contained with your styles, you can have a scoped property on there, and that will go and rewrite your CSS to have attributes, and then it will put those on the DOM as well. So you're scoping your CSS to that component completely, so you don't have to have these complex indented and nested CSS, which is very difficult to read. You can just access P, etc. for that component, and because it's scoped, you then don't have to worry about it affecting any other component. But I like to keep all my stuff separate, completely packaged up now, especially for components, because the idea is you're trying to create reusable code. So you can then put that CSS there, and then if you split that module out with code splitting, that CSS will get appended when it's needed, rather than it being loaded initially on the first load. So your CSS gets brought with that JavaScript and your HTML.
And what about naming convention? I mean, if I have the same CSS somewhere else with the same name, what will happen? It will keep the component name on top.
I don't quite get what you mean.
The question. Okay, doesn't matter. Let's continue with the other question. Sorry about that. This question, maybe it's too complicated to answer. But if we have to choose between Vue.js and Angular, just with a few sentences, what do you think about this point of view?
This is very heated.
Sorry, I know that's a complicated question, but if you can answer from your point of view.
Yeah. We use it quite heavily still within Sainsbury's Angular. It's great until things start getting complex. You have root scopes that are using dirty watching, so everything goes in updates. You don't know what's happening. You have everything built in as a services, so it's a big bundled size, whereas Vue only cares about the Vue layer, and then you can extend it to what you need. So if you want to create a small prototype thing that's just a simple little application, like a calculator or something, because you're just demoing something, then this is the perfect tool. And then it's extendable. So as you go and enhance that little application, you can bring in those necessary features to help you enhance. And because you're not using dirty watching, it's much faster in Angular. Although Angular is not as bad as performance as many people think. If you structure it right, you can get great performance results. But Vue's definitely on par for definitely updates. So you go and update that attribute. Because it only cares about that single attribute, it goes and modifies anything to do with that. But you have to explicitly point to what's being modified. So Vue will cater for all of that. So you have a property, and it uses this .message and this filter to combine them and then create the custom message. But only if one of those gets updated, then that message will be displayed there, and then vice versa. But if you have both update, then it chains along nicely. Whereas I found with Angular, you update one thing, and then everything gets updated. And then you digest, you use apply, and you can't work it out.
Probably last question, I think.
Yep.
It's just a simple one about events, actually. So if you've got a child component that you want to send an event to its siblings, is there more of a simple way than sending an event up the tree to its parent, and the parent listens for that and then broadcasts it back down? So the sibling, is there more of a simple mechanism for that?
Yep, we actually investigated that when we first started using Vue. We was a bit mystified as why, like, if you had an uncle, so you had two components on the top level, why that didn't catch the event. Is because it uses it uses DOM events. So that's how DOM events work. It goes up one tree and it doesn't go back down a tree. But I like 9 now, that if I broadcast it up where it's going to be dispatched down to, so I can follow the whole path. So I go to the root component, I see it's called it, and I know where it's going, rather than just this event capturing something. That you might have 2 events called the same thing without realising, and you're getting something updated and you don't know what's happening, and you actually can follow a tree. But there are ways to get around that with having another event library in there, and you use that event library to broadcast through everything.
Yeah, so I know I don't mind it because it is quite explicit. So you would just catch it in the parent and then send it back down.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to explicitly pass it down. There's no quick way to do it unless you bring in a small library to do global events, which I like having that chain, seeing what happens as well.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.